Morning, Alex.
I wouldn't call it a good morning, but hi.
Oh, you're not happy?
It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. It gets worse every year, boys. It gets worse every year. I came on here 10 months ago. I said, this ownership are killing us. And they've done it. We're dead.
Well, I mean, he's left you in a... Look, Maresca's left.
We're not Chelsea anymore. We are CFC London.
You're a different Chelsea, though. You're not Roman Abramovich Chelsea, but you're a different Chelsea.
We're pathetic. I can't... You don't understand. We have the worst owners in world football. They're worse than the Glazers. They're worse than the Glazers.
Come on, mate.
Of Man United took 15, 20 years. They've done it in less than 5. They've killed us. They've killed us. A manager has been sacked because he doesn't have control of rotation. He doesn't have control of his own substitutions. He's not allowed any say in the transfer market. He's got nothing. He's got I salute Maresca for walking out. Apparently, he's waived off severance as well. He's been happy to leave Chelsea without even getting paid. Do you know how bad your club needs to be for a manager to walk out the door and not even ask for a full severance package? Mourinho always got paid. Tuchel got paid. They all got paid. Why has Maresca just walked out the door? There is big problems at Chelsea. We are red flag FC. We are balance the book FC. We are accountancy FC. We are private equity FC. I'm just so finished. And of course, there's already a protest organised 17th of January, 1 o'clock before Brentford. You got to come out, guys, because this is just ridiculous. I mean, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm seeing an elite football club being dragged through the depths. I mean, you talk about in the mud. What's below that? That's how I feel right now. I was trying to celebrate New Year. I'm getting notification. This must be a joke. And then I wake up on New Year's Day. It's been sacked. We are not a serious football club. And not to mention that BLUECO, they're also going to sabotage Strasbourg season because Liam Rosnier, he's the man that's going to solve our problems. Liam Rosnier, the man who before he managed Strasbourg was at Hull and Brighton. Of course, he was at Brighton. This is criminal. This is the worst decision I think I've ever. This is worse than when Tuchel got sacked in many ways, because at least Maresca understood the project. He knew what he was signing up for, but it turns out it was even worse than that.
Well, when they first took over and we tried to work out, they spent £1 billion. They give the manager a load of players, and we were questioning, how can you give a footballer an 8-year contract? Football's been going for hundreds of years. There's obvious reasons why you don't give someone an 8-year contract, because you get in your armchair and that's you done for 8 years. If things go against you, you just go, right, I'm not going anywhere. You ain't getting rid of me. I got 7 years left. Look at Mudryk. Now, I understand that financial fair play, they've given him long contracts to spread try and get round the rules. But when you give him players 7 or 8 year contracts, it just breeds complacency. You just sit in. Some players will fight and try and get back in the team, but most of them will go, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to run my contract down. I'm going to sit here. I'm not going to play. And my value that you paid for me is going to be 0. There's one thing I didn't agree with, but you're right. You're trying to say there's worse owners who give you no money.
Well, yeah, look, what I would say, Al, is I hear you. Like, I hear you. They're not in a good place at the minute, Chelsea, with what's going on, but it is a brilliant football club. You're 5th in the table. There have been some positives this season. The December was a disaster for you guys. I get that. Your performances against Barcelona are good. Against Arsenal, you got some top players in Casado, Enzo Fernandez, Cole Palmer, Esteval. I know you're digging out the ball, but there could be some bright lights at the end of it. No,
any light is gone. That is gone. We have shown our true colours, guys. Remember when Egbali came in, he said that Chelsea wasn't well managed on the football side. We weren't data driven enough. He was criticising what Abramovich did. Apparently, we sacked too many managers. We've sacked 5. Surprise, surprise. Like, there's no trust the process anymore. There is no trust the process. As other fans have said before me, it's now a case of trust the process. Honestly, I do not I do not understand how you can look at this club right now and the way we're being run at the moment and see any light at the end of the tunnel. Because do you see us striving more than a club like Aston Villa? No, I don't see us. I don't. At least Jim Radcliffe is a Man United
fan. You won the Club
fan.
World Cup. All right, let's not get away from that. You won the Club World Cup.
Despite self-sabotage, we were able to have some success, which is more credit to Maresca, who I didn't like last season. He showed that actually, you know what, even working with owners, they don't want to invest in ready-made players. They don't give you a centre-back. They don't give you a competent goalkeeper. They don't give you an experienced striker. You don't have a proper left winger, and you're still able to win 2 trophies. That just proves it's baffling, this decision. It's absolutely baffling. And then we've got Juventus. We've got Man City knocking on Maresca's door. This is the biggest compliment you could ever ask for. It was brilliant. It was like, you know what, Chelsea? I don't have a problem with this model if we are able to actually stick to our guns and show some backbone. We can't even last 2 years with a manager. How are we going to compete for silverware? You look at Arsenal, you can criticize Arteta, you can criticize everything. They stuck by him, they supported him, and that is a footballing project, whatever you want to call it. And we are no longer a footballing project. Ed Barley, remember, when he took over Chelsea, he said he was inspired by the Brighton model. And that inspiration is shining through because we're turning into the London version of Brighton, honestly. We're going to continue to see wages being cut. We're going to continue to see young players that are unproven signed, like you said, on those 7-8 year contracts. You say that players are in the armchair. It's more like they're stuck behind prison bars, because I don't think Cole Palmer is going to want to be a part of this project. Moises Caicedo has not signed an extension. And we know that actually when you look at this model, Todd Bowley said it himself, if there's a player that's got 2-3 years left on his contract, that's when they're looking to sell, because they want them to extend before that. So in the next couple of years, if you don't get an extension from a Caicedo, other players, then you'll see them getting sold as well, because Chelsea are not going to lose players for free. But I think today the main message needs to be that the fan base has been lost on this project. I don't support it. I don't understand it. And to be quite honest with you, I feel physically sick. And that's not because I was hungover from New Year. It's because of the decision.
Alex, Alex, clear it up for us. So what is this strategy? The owners?
The strategy is build a club up in value without winning trophies by lowering the wages. So Brighton's
you won 2 trophies,
famously said that he liked the fact that Brighton's model meant they spent 10% of their revenue on wages. Now, you compare that to a side like Aston Villa. They're spending as much as they can on wages. That's the first thing. The second thing is you only sign young players because they retain their value or they can go up in value, okay? So it's less risky. You can see Delap, you see Garnacho, you could probably get your money back if you wanted to. Whereas if we signed Ollie Watkins, which a lot of fans want, in 3 years, he loses his value. So that's another part of it. But the main thing is we're now a selling club. There's been reports coming out that Clear Lake don't care if we win the Carabao Cup. I'm hardly surprised. They're not going to make any money from that. And ultimately, they're just going to continue to cut costs and raise season ticket prices. And then, you know, the crazy thing is we're run by private equity. Their sole concern is money. And we don't even have a front of shirt sponsor. How many football clubs at this level have no front of shirt sponsorship when you are run by private equity? The whole goal of private equity is to go into a business, make it more profitable, and then sell it for a profit. You've missed out on almost £100 million of front of shirt sponsor.
Enough of that. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Big up to everyone. I hope you're all doing very, very well. Welcome back to Chelsea Fan TV. We are going to be we're going to go through quite a lot today. If you solely want to look at football, this might not be the show for you. If you want to understand the ins and outs, some of the details that we hear so much about, but we actually know very little about, in terms of the finances, in terms of Clear Lake's position, Bowley's position, both sides of the consortium, the takeover. This is the show for you. And I'm joined with Bobby Fairview, who I have spoken with before. Just over a year ago, I spoke with Bobby, and he educated me on everything surrounding the club. This was around the time of the first protest, and I think without Bobby, a lot of people would not have a real understanding of where Chelsea are at this moment. So big up to you, Bobby. It's great to have you on, mate. Thanks for taking the time out. How are you anyway?
I am very well, Alex. And I mean, that's quite the introduction that you're crediting me with your understanding of some of these issues. I mean, big up to the chat, by the way. By way of quick introduction, I'm not really much into football finance as a background. I am a CPA registered in New York, and I'm a chartered accountant in Ontario, Canada. But more importantly, I'm just a football fan. And I was using X, like most people, to voice some of my frustration over the last 4 years, I want to say. But to your point, I think, early last year, you and I had a few conversations, and we realized that the fan base really is struggling for facts, clear facts about what's going on with the finances. I don't think it was obvious to many people the underlying problems that were brewing, and they're being let down, I think, by the mainstream media. So it's really up to folks like yourself to really try to get some of this information out there. So happy to be here. That's a little bit about myself. Let me apologize to the viewers about being anonymous. I mean, I think people would appreciate that there's a little bit of overlap here with my professional life, so I've got to be discreet, but I also want to be able to speak to fans candidly.
No, I think it's fantastic, Bobby. And I think it's great that you can come here even in this capacity. It's fantastic what you're doing. Obviously, everyone needs to respect that you're still working. So, we don't want to get in the way of your personal life. But obviously, Chelsea, I can imagine, probably impacts, your mental health just as much as everyone else. So we want to get back on track. How long have you been looking into everything surrounding Chelsea within, a financial standpoint? And when was the moment where you thought, I need to get involved because this is getting ridiculous now?
So I think I've been looking at it from a sporting perspective, and let me confess, I'm an E fan, as sometimes I'm accused of being, because I sit in Bermuda. And for context, I'm here because a number of private equity firms actually have set up reinsurance companies in Bermuda. So I don't work for the PE firms themselves, but what I do is to advise them or have worked for them previously to actually help them buy out blocks of pension business. But the overlap with the sport and financial aspect of it really only came about last year when I saw the financial statements being released.
And just to backtrack a little bit, Bobby, so you work directly with people in private equity, so you have first-hand experience of that environment.
Yes, so from about 2016 or so. And as an accountant, let me be clear, I don't do deals, but what I do as an accountant is to translate the financial information for the decision makers. So if a private equity firm is looking at buying a block of insurance business, I would be part of that process of understanding how it impacts the financial statements of the reinsurer itself. But then that information obviously goes to the decision makers at the private equity firm. So that is where you get a sense as to how they think, how they make decisions, how they look at businesses. So that's the context in which I would have been coming at this from.
I'm with you. So keep going from what you were saying about why you decided to get involved and the moment you felt was right.
I think, you probably have the same frustration that I do, right? About the quality of the journalism that we get from mainstream journalists in particular. And look, I'm sympathetic. These folks need to make a living, right? And there is a kind of quid pro quo where they get to speak to the club directly. And that access, then, they're always trading that access, if you like, and they then therefore need to carry the message of the club. So I had that frustration, but last year in particular, what I noticed was the sequence in which the club released its financial statements. And they usually release the financial statements for Chelsea FC Holdings, which is the holding company of the club itself. And that holding company is subject to PSR rules. So when I saw them report a profit last year, I don't know if you remember those headlines, Chelsea FC made record profit. And I was like, hold on a second. This is not quite ringing right. Why do they have a record profit? Because there's nothing that we're seeing that should have been generating more revenue. But then I realized that, it was that internal asset sale of the women's team that had been artificially inflating the profit. And I said to myself, well, if I sold my car to myself, how do I make a profit, right? It doesn't happen. That's not the way accounting rules work. I didn't ask myself that question, but I was hoping that fans would be asking themselves that question, right? And that's when I decided to say, look, let me have a look actually at the financial statements of the holding companies above it. And that is where I came across Greg Cordell, who produces an exhibit that I think you've used on your show several times, which actually showed that holding company structure. And I started to dissect it to try to understand, well, how does the Bowling and Clear Lake interest actually drill down to their interest in the club? And then what are the entities that publish financial statements on Companies House? And that's where I discovered the financial statements of 22 Holdco. And we'll put this diagram up at some point in time, but that's where I discovered the financial statements. And it told a completely different story. What I realized is that Chelsea FC itself, because it doesn't carry the debt, there was at least 120 million pounds of interest that was missing from the earnings. And then there's several other things that are caught up in the holding company itself. So folks are now looking at the diagram. A lot of you probably have seen this, several times on this channel and with Eunice. I realized that they had actually incurred 1.1 billion of losses by the end of the financial year for 2024. So June 2024, they had accrued or had incurred 1.1 billion of losses. But meanwhile, on Twitter, fans were saying, and various folks who, wanted to believe in the project, that we had made a record profit. So those two things just didn't make sense. And therefore I decided, look, I need to start doing my part in educating fans that that's a fake profit. You cannot make a profit selling something to yourself. And that's then, I believe, I can't remember how, I think we got introduced through Ruben, another Chelsea supporter. And that's how really I started to engage with some content creators like yourselves, Johnny Minerals, etc., giving them background information that, hey, what you're seeing right now is actually not the complete picture. The focus needs to be on 22 Holdco, which is the ultimate holding company in the structure.
So, yeah, I think that's one of the things as well, is that the information that was out there, Bobby, it was for everyone to see, but you just needed to know where to go. And I mean, do you, when you look at the journalists, for example, I mean, you've basically already said, I mean, it's quite obvious they compromised a lot of them, for obvious reasons. But do you actually think they fully understood what was going on as well, or do you think they were being misled?
I mean, there's some there's a point in time where you have to really sit back and ask yourself, well, this guy he knows about the sale of the women's team, but yet still in the same post, he's talking about record profits. So it's hard to make that distinction. But as I said, looking at that diagram on your screen right now, that's hella complicated, right?
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. And when you sit back and you ask yourself, what is the commercial purpose or economic purpose of this structure? And it does not become immediately clear, even to a qualified accountant. It took me days to actually work through that. And imagine that a year ago, this was before AI. So you can't even actually do some load it in an AI app and start asking questions.
Yeah.
So you had to painstakingly go through the financial statements, etc., to really understand what's going on. So, a journalist who's a sports journalist, they're not going to understand and see some of the weaknesses in what the club is saying to them. So I'm sympathetic to some extent.
I mean, I've seen a comment as well saying, what would the diagram look like under Roman Abramovich? I think it was just the one company, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he had possibly two holding companies. So he had Chelsea, then Chelsea FC Holdings. And folks, if you look at the bottom of the diagram, there's that little blue box there with Chelsea, the club itself, and then owned by Chelsea FC Holdings. Then he would have had Fordstam on top of that. Now, the reason for that is any entity that owns Chelsea FC Holdings does not come into PSR compliance. And that is kind of where Roman, you saw the reporting about some of the payments that he made. He would have been making it out of that company so that it doesn't fall within the EPL radar. But he, to your point, was was a lot more simple, an easier model to understand, that he just had one holding company once removed from what was required to be PSR compliant. Okay.
Well, what I will say to everyone in the chat as well is this is going to be a Q&A as well, guys. So put your questions in the chat. We will be reading out any super chats as well. So if you want us to read anything out, then do that. I mean, we've got one already from CFC Daniel, and he's saying, win, lose or draw BLUECO out, BLUECO can sell any assets. Do you want to go straight into this, Bobby, or are we going to go straight from the beginning, from the sale all the way through? I guess that gives a little bit more context as well. Like, what would you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, we can give a quick response here. He's absolutely right. And this is something that Ruben Weston, who is on X as well, I know that Ruben has been kind of in the background. He and I speak quite often. I'm convincing him to come on your show one of these days. But he has actually done a lot of research. He's a lawyer by trade. He's actually done a lot of research on the corporate documents in Companies House. So I'd be spending time looking at the financial statements, but he'd be looking at things like the Articles of Incorporation.
Right.
Sorry, the Articles of Association, which is a document that describes how the owners have agreed to hold this investment. Okay, so he did a lot of work there and uncovered, for the benefit of the fan community, that what Sky News had said back in 2022 about an anti-Glazer clause was absolute fiction. I think that was an attempt at the time to really connect the Chelsea sale to the name of Manchester United and the publicity that brings. But there's no such thing as an anti-Glazer clause. The agreement between the owners are between themselves, and Roman does not have a mechanism to police them. So that's a good segue actually into how this thing was brought together.
There's nothing in terms of a contract or no proof that there was any Glazer clause whatsoever. So when we say that perhaps there would be, are we saying a verbal agreement, or what are we saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to dig into this issue particularly, so just to be clear as to what Sky News reported at the time, they I believe may have had sight of the Articles of Association. And this is a public document for 22 Whole Code that's on Companies House. And it has been there since 2022. We just never went and looked at it, right?
Right.
But what that document describes is how Bowley and Egbali brought Clear Lake and the Bowley Group together to form 22 Whole Code. So that it describes the fact that there are two groups of shareholders, common share A and B, and they're both described as majority holders, but just the majority holders of the individual share. And therefore they require, and the Articles of Association explain this explicitly, they require permission from each other to sell. It never had anything to do with Roman. And in any case, nobody buys an investment of that size and have those handcuffs on them. So it never economically or legally made sense to me. But when you actually go and see that document, you will see exactly the mechanisms that are in there for them to be able to sell. And it simply requires approval from each other.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to talk about the why we've split up all the assets of Chelsea individually as well. But we'll hold fire on that for a second. Big up to CFC Daniel as well. Let's go from the beginning then, Bobby. Let's go from. I know you referred me to a thread on your page about the reason that Chelsea is now a sell to buy club, and it's got nothing to do with UEFA sanctions. And you seem to have found out how the purchase of Chelsea was actually funded as well, which I think may come as a surprise to a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people have had their eyes open in the past couple of days. But please just enlighten me. I mean, go from the beginning, maybe give people context as well if they don't fully understand private equity and maybe the situation with Bowley as well, because he's a huge part of this. We don't seem to be talking about him an awful lot right now, but without Bowley, Clearlake wouldn't have been in the picture. Yeah, I mean, where should we start with that?
Sure. We should. I mean, there is a story behind it, which I learn more about every day. In all fairness, and I want to say, if folks are hearing me use words that are not familiar to them, my goal really is to translate what I'm seeing so that everyone can understand it. A pediatrician, for example, has never done, an accounting degree. So we need to be able to break this down into simple language that folks can understand. So please Absolutely. Interrupt and stop me at any time.
No problem.
So the financial statements is the starting point, right? And to your earlier question about whether or not they can sell, apart from the fact that the articles of association explain explicitly how a sale can take place, the financials themselves are audited by a firm called KPMG. So that's a massive global accounting firm. They would be required to have 22 Holdco disclose in its financial statements whether or not there was a restriction on the sale. So you can see that there's no such thing in those financial statements. If you load them into your favorite AI app, sure, you would see that there's actually no encumbrances on the asset itself, right? And if there was, fans are entitled to sue KPMG for misleading them.
Sure.
But just going back to the beginning, and I've been, somewhat uncharitable to Todd Bowley because of the nonsense that he says from time to time. But he was the president, I believe, of a private equity firm, asset manager called Guggenheim, that was founded by Mark Walter.
Correct.
And they arranged a transaction to acquire the Dodgers from the MLB. Because once a sports club in the US goes into administration, it gets bought out by the rest of the league. And in order to make that transaction happen, Bowley apparently is credited with being the architect behind a television deal that made the financing for the Dodgers viable. So that's how he made his name, if you like.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, because they were able to basically sell their television rights so that instead of going through, let's say, MLB, you just went directly through the Dodgers. Is that right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So that is the nature of the structure. Now, it is important to understand that Guggenheim could not own the Dodgers directly. And this is another piece of good work that Ruben has been doing, because what he's uncovered, and he probably shared this with you, is that sports clubs are not allowed to be owned by private equity firms in the US.
And that's the same in basketball, baseball, football, any sport.
Any professional sports league in the US, the league rules, I think only the NFL only recently allowed for a 10% investment. MLB may have been doing this for quite a while because John W. Henry from Liverpool, he actually used private equity funding for the Boston Red Sox. And by the way, I think that's the appropriate use of private equity. Private equity does have a role, and we can get into that in a different discussion. But they do have a role, but there's a hard limit on whether or not a private equity firm can actually make an investment in a sports team in the US. And they get it. An institution does not have the feelings of a fan. It doesn't share the emotions of a fan. They have a single mandate, which is to deliver a return on investment. And therefore, the US leagues have determined this is not appropriate for sport. And this is where I think Europe is lagging behind the US, as greedy as we say Americans are, and I think it's a little bit unfair. They have identified this problem and have already proactively prevented it. So Walter and Bowley and these guys are individuals who bought the Dodgers, okay? And they then obviously would have borrowed money personally to do so. So that's how the deal itself.
So that was a personal takeover as opposed to an institution.
Exactly right. Right. So if you fast forward a bit, and this is a rumor. I mean, I've not seen it reported explicitly anywhere, but it was a rumor that when Roman was prevented from being in the UK, because remember he got banned from entering the UK at some point in time, at 2019-ish, is what I heard. Bowley had been sniffing around trying to buy Chelsea at that point in time.
2018, yes.
Right. So we've seen that. So then fast forward to the post-COVID kind of era, or during COVID, when the UK government, the Ukraine war started. We know the club was put up for sale. So Roman was forced to sell. And Bowley felt at that point in time that this was a great opportunity to buy a distressed asset.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, no, I mean, and just going off course as well, just to give everyone a bit of context as well. I've been reading Sanctioned. I don't know if you've read it, Bobby. It's actually a great book. Have you been reading this?
I have not. No,
you haven't read it. It's actually really good. It gives you a bit of context as well about the sale. And I will be honest, it goes against a couple of the narratives. It does go against a couple of the narratives in terms of, like, is Bowley a football fan? Does Hansi Wiss care about football? You know, this book makes it seem like Bowley was a football fan because he played football at school in America. It also says that Hansi Wiss was a football fan, which I found very interesting. And it also talks about when Rain, the bank, was in charge of the sale of Chelsea. Obviously, Roman chose Rain, but Rain apparently directly called Todd Bowley as soon as that sale was basically possible. And so he was the first person they called, because they had already had discussions in 2018 when Bowley was looking into buying the football club, but for whatever reason it just didn't happen. So it's quite interesting when you look at it from that perspective. It's not doesn't really go with, it's not really financial. It's just more of the story itself.
It's important. It's important to know.
I mean, there are a couple of questions that have already come up, Bobby. I don't know if you mind going slightly off piece.
Sure.
On track. JC's got a question saying, how do you make 30K per hour loss in a year when revenue increased 40% and net spend on players was positive? Isn't the owners taking out money using transfer pricing? I'll be honest, I don't fully understand that question.
Sure, it's a pretty complex question, and I think it brings in a couple strands that are probably not accurate. I assume he's done a calculation about the per hour loss. I am not sure about the revenue increased by 40%, because I don't think it has. And I think you can look at a few publications right now. I don't have it on hand, but it's definitely not a 40% increase in revenue. And the player sales, people need to be careful with the player sales, because people think that transfers in or out have a direct income statement impact. It actually doesn't. because of that concept of amortization, right? And I don't know if you want to use this session. I mean, I think we can cover that when we go through the next session about the financials specifically.
Sure.
But player sales are not going to improve your results if you are selling players below their book value, which has happened in several instances with what we've seen over the last 3 years.
Okay. He just responded saying revenues increased from 400 to 700 million.
They absolutely did not. So I can tell you now that the revenues were under 500 million. 700 million is what they're projecting for next year, which as we know, Liverpool made 700 million when they won the league last year. So there's no chance that Chelsea, with a smaller stadium and not winning the league, is going to achieve the same level of revenue as a championship winning team. So it was not 700.
Hopefully that clears that up. We are going to go through as many questions as we can, guys, but we don't go off piece too much. So we'll go through, and then we'll go through some questions as well. So bear with us. We'll try and answer as many as we can. So we've spoken about Guggenheim, obviously not being able to get involved in the takeover of the Dodgers, which is why Mark Walter and Bowley did it personally, and I think that was sort of where we left on.
Sure. So we got to 2022 with the forced sale with Roman.
Yes.
And so Roman, I want to say he's probably one of the most clever businessmen I have ever read or seen. And I say that with the utmost sincerity. To have the vision he bought the club, I want to say, for like 160 million pounds at the time. A lot of that was outstanding debt. That was a forced sale as well, because I think Ken Bates was in trouble at the time. And then he started to spend, and you get the usual accusations from the Liverpools and the Arsenals that he was not running an economic business. He was actually not in it for commercial reasons, whereas the other clubs were. And, you heard accusations of sports washing and money laundering and all this stuff, right? But genuinely, that man actually covered 1.5 billion of losses over 19 years. And even in a forced sale scenario in 2022, he sold Chelsea and made £1 billion of profit. So people don't really know that, right? So when you think about the purchase price and the loans that he wrote off about 1.5 billion pounds of value, but then he sold the club to Bowley and Egbali for 2.5 billion. So there's your £1 billion of profit that he made, although he was apparently money laundering or not in it for commercial reasons.
So yeah, I mean, I think the reason people probably don't talk about that enough, Bobby, is because obviously he wasn't going to keep any of that money regardless. That's still in an account, just building interest, and he's having. I think they've got some sort of legal confrontation with the UK government, because Starmer's saying the money's going to Ukraine. He's saying no, it's going to Russians and Ukrainians. And I think that's probably why people haven't spoken about it enough. But if he wasn't sanctioned and this was just a sale off of his own back, then yeah, that's $1 billion.
Genius. It was genius, right? I mean, the rate of return per year is under 3%, which is modest for the kind of risks that he took. But I think the important thing to recognize is that the year before he left, for example, there were the COVID lockdowns. So not only was he not getting stadium revenue, you had a situation where he, out of the goodness of his heart, opened up the hotels around Stamford Bridge to house COVID workers who needed to be close to their workplace in London, right? And he incurred significant losses there. So his return would have gone up above 3%. But nonetheless, look, he did a good deal for himself under the forced sale situation and the sanctions, etc. And so Bowley thought, hey, look, this is a great opportunity. The problem is that Bowley actually only had 300 million pounds. Okay.
Yeah.
And not only was Roman asking for 2.5 billion to be paid to him as cash as the purchase price, in his final act for the Chelsea fans, he actually required the new owners to invest 1.7 billion pounds into the club after they acquired it. And if you look at the financial statements in 2023, it is disclosed that that money was committed by the new owners to build a stadium, for youth development, and for the women's team. It was not earmarked to buy players, because Roman left us with a pretty decent team. You know, people went through that rebuild and they forget that that team actually used to compete, right? So what you have there is this situation where these new guys needed to find $2.5 billion to pay him, but they also needed to secure 1.7 billion upfront. Roman needed to see that, hey, look, the banks are agreeing to finance this, or whoever, wherever the money is coming from, you have a legal agreement to put 1.7 billion into Chelsea. So that is where my post that I referred you to starts, right? Because it says, well, how did these guys actually raise this money then to pay Roman? I'll pause there. I've been talking a lot. I don't know if there are any questions on anything I've said there. I'm happy to continue.
No, I love it. I love it. Okay. The Blue Lounge says, under what circumstances can a sale be forced or lightly, and can fans have an impact on this?
He's big up to Mo. You know, he's actually touching on part of the reason why I remain anonymous, and it's probably something that we're going to cover in part 3, which is the way forward. The honest answer is bankruptcy. And when I say that, I don't mean bankruptcy at the Chelsea FC Holdings level. I'm talking about bankruptcy at the 22 Holdco level. So this is where we can pivot. Sorry, you want to ask me?
Yeah. So people might think, well, what does that mean? Because 22 Holdco is part of Chelsea anyway. So, you know, why would that be different?
It is not, though, right? So it is actually at the top of the diagram. So if folks can just look at the diagram itself, you can see two groups funneling in. So Blues Investment Midco LP, that's the entity that was formed by Clearlake in the Cayman Islands to hold their investment in Chelsea. So this is where you see 61.85%. That was the amount of interest that they had in the club after they gave Bowley 1.6 billion. Bowley only had 300 million, and he was trying to buy an investment that required 4.2 billion. And so he needed to finance the 2.5 billion that goes to Roman in cash first. So what he did was to go to his friend Walter and to Weiss, got 300 million from them each, and now he had 900 million. Still not enough.
So repeat that again for me, Bobby. That's just for me. Say that again, please.
Yeah. So if you think about the fact that Roman said, I need 2.5 billion sent to my Stamford Fordstrom company in Jersey. Yeah. I need 2.5 billion pounds deposited there, and I need to see that you have the money to fund the remaining 1.7 billion that needs to be invested for the stadium, women's team, and youth development.
Okay.
So he needed to see that. Bowley wanted this club, and he only had 300 million pounds.
I'm with you.
So Bowley had to start raising money in a short space of time. So he and Walter invest in sports teams together. So Walter said, I'll put 300 million up as well. I'll match you. Then they went to their friend Weiss, and they said, Weiss, we need some money. He trumped up another 300 million. So they only had 900 million at that point in time.
Okay. And
Roman needed 2.5 initially. So that's where they went to Clearlake. And Clearlake said, well, we'll take a 61.35% stake. We'll form our Cayman company called Blues Investments LP. And we will give you 1.6 billion to invest alongside you and become co-owners. So that's how you get to the first 2.5 billion, right? So you see the Bowley Group over there. That's Weiss, Walter, and Bowley himself owning 38.15%. And they've then formed a company which is now known as 22 Holdco Limited, which bought the club from Roman.
Okay, so no, that was very well explained, Bobby. That's brilliant. So you had Bowley, who had 300 million. Then he obviously went to Mark Walter, 300 million again, 300 from Hansi Wiss. Obviously, this is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of buying a football club, it's peanuts. And that's when Clearlake come into the picture. So we've got the money all together with the consortium. I don't know if you have any knowledge on this. This might be relevant financially. Why Clearlake? Because we just alluded to private equity in American sports. Is that just because there was no other options?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and unfortunately, there's no public reporting on this. The timing is interesting, so I'll explain why. It's a matter of who had the money and would have been ready to go, right? And maybe this is where we take a little bit of a step back to actually understand private equity investing.
Sure.
So these are asset managers, meaning wealthy people, well, very few wealthy people. They usually manage money for large institutions, specifically pension plans, life insurance companies, and large endowments. Okay, so these are this is money that's there sitting for the long term to generate huge returns. Okay.
You said pensions, endowments, and what was the other one?
Life insurance companies.
Life insurance, perfect.
Okay. So these are long-term investors, but they usually allocate something like 10% of their portfolios to equity investments, meaning owning businesses. So whenever we talk about equity, we're talking about ownership. So private equity means private ownership. So this is where a group of wealthy people give money to a manager and say, we want to privately own a company. Barclays Bank is a public company, right? So if you wanted to buy Barclays Bank, you would go on the stock exchange and buy up all these shares, and that would be public ownership, right? Because it's a publicly traded investment.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Private equity is if somebody wanted to come and buy Chelsea Fan TV, right? That is a private company, and therefore private investors are coming to you and hopefully offering you £5 million for your channel.
It's more than Goldbridge.
I don't know what Goldbridge's number was.
3.5.
We'll get you there. We'll get you there.
Yeah.
So this is where it's important, where what we've discovered is that Clearlake is actually not a qualified private equity investor in US sports teams. So this is an important thing to understand. Clearlake could not right now go and give John W. Henry a loan for the Boston Red Sox because they're not accredited with the leagues.
So when you say they're not qualified, so you're saying that even though in the NFL, for example, you said they can buy 10% of teams, Clearlake couldn't even do that.
Right, because they need to go through a process to prove to the league that they're an appropriate private equity firm to invest in those clubs. So there are two hurdles they need to get across. First, there's a 10% cap, and then the PE firm itself needs to get accredited.
Okay, I'm with you.
So Clearlake doesn't have this accreditation, and therefore is preventing from investing in US sports teams. But obviously they had an interest in doing it. They are specialists in distressed debt, bad loans, in other words. They have been known to have a disproportionate investment in buying bad receivables.
Risky assets, we put it like that?
Very risky assets. But also they generate higher returns, right? So they have been generating pretty good returns for their investors. And they have, the way private equity firms raise money is that they open up a fund, right? So they announce to their investors, hey, we are starting Clearlake Partners Fund number 7 at the time. in 2022 was the fund that was open for investment. And that word open is very important. So the timing was right, where Clearlake had an open fund that was actively raising money for investment for their next set of purchases of new companies. And therefore, Bowley, would have known them and said, hey, I've got this opportunity. Can I use some of the money from your fund? I need 1.6 billion pounds.
Right.
Ag Valley, now the other thing about private equity and the way they raise money from these life insurers and pension plans to do these investments is that the funds themselves have a very strict governance structure. They can't just do anything. Ag Valley can't, once he gets that, raises that money, he can't buy anything he wants. He can't put any money into his existing businesses. That fund is there for whatever the investment committee of the fund decides is the investment strategy. And it would restrict an allocation to any single investment by 20 to 25%.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
So yeah, so obviously they needed 1.6 billion, and what are we looking at in terms of the size of the fund?
So if you were to divide that, I don't know if you have your calculator open, but if you were to divide that by 20%, that would give you a number. I don't have my calculator handy, but certainly more than the fund itself in terms of the allocation limit.
So what, we divide 1.6 billion
by 20%.
Okay. Get the ChatGPT on this.
Sure. I mean, I can do it. I can just open up my phone very quickly.
It says divided by 20% means divided
I think
by
it's about 32 billion. I'm just doing that mentally, but
it says 8 billion. That can't be right. Is that right? 1.6 billion divided by 26 by 20.
Well, but by 20%. By 0.2.
It says 8 billion on ChatGPT. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is interesting. Let me see my math here. Sorry, but nonetheless, I mean, I think that could be right. But nonetheless, the fund would have breached whatever limit was in place.
So they would have gone over the limit.
Exactly.
Right.
Without trying to do the math. And the reason we know this is that they started a special fund called COP3, which allowed the investors to put anybody who was interested, who was outside of that Fund 7 structure, to put more money in to finance the 1.6 billion. So just to recap, two funds from Clearlake, COP3 and CCP7, so Fund 3 and Fund 7, if you like, just to shorthand it. Those two funds raised the 1.6 billion and gave it to Bowley.
Right. Okay. And okay, so they consciously took the risk, taking that money out, start the new funds to raise more capital as well, and that would have been with the thumbs up from everyone else. Is that correct? It's not something they could just do off their own backs.
Right. That's something that Clearlake can do at any time. The way these funds work, so right now Fund 8 is currently open to investors, but they're struggling to hit the target of 15 billion pounds, that $15 billion that they were looking to raise for future investments. And there's a broader story that's going on in private credit, private equity markets. If anybody were to actually Google private credit right now, they'll see that there's a crisis going on where investors are asking the likes of Ares and Blackstone back for their money. Okay.
Yeah.
So those very investors that put the money in up front, the second fund, Fund 3, that was the one that allowed them to raise money above the limits of Fund 7. Okay.
Yeah.
So they've got all the money. Now here's the thing. Those funds then closed. That's important. Remember I said there was an open Clearlake Fund 7 raising capital. or it had capital and was deploying it for investment. They got COP3, the second fund, to allow them to raise enough money above the limit. And so those funds then closed in 2022, meaning that no more investment can go into COP3 or CCP7. Is that resonating? Because that's a really important point. Because whenever people talk about, hey, I mean, it's a private equity firm, they can always get more money and they can always put more money in Chelsea. Well, no, because the funds that are holding the investment in Blues Investments LP, Clear Lake's vehicle in the Cayman Islands, those funds are now closed to new investment.
So that money is, well, I mean, it's a big fund to begin with. You would have hoped that would have been enough to cover everything. And I guess that brings us on to one of the next topics, which again we're sort of sidetracking. We can do that ever so slightly. Is have they run out of money? But I don't know if you want to leave that for a little bit later on.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that here, because not only can't it raise more money, but it also can't deploy more money. Right?
They're stuck.
The fund is stuck. It's money in a box. That's it. Nothing is coming in. Nothing is going out for 10 years. And that's where the whole 10-year thing came from. Because once Egbali promised the Clear Lake investors that, you know, he's going to buy this business and they'll get their money back in 10 years, he then needed to push down that agreement to the agreement with Bowley's company, right, which is the top right-hand corner there. So that one is called BLUECO 22 Holdings LP. That business then needed to get into agreement with Blues Investment Midco to agree to sell in 10 years so that Egbali can pay back his investors. And
would that leave, that would mean they both sell together, yeah?
Yes, so they require, so if you read the Articles of Association of 22 Holdco, they need to each other's agreement in order to execute a sale. But the agreement right now is that they stay in for 10 years.
Right. Okay. So if Egbali clearly couldn't just sell their side and Bowley stay.
I think they can do that with the agreement of Bowley, and that's where Ruben will be an expert on this in terms of the scenarios in which each other can sell, because he studied the document carefully. But they can, with the agreement of each other, anybody can sell. They can sell anything under 22 Holdco itself or anything underneath it. But there is a caveat to that.
Why all of the parts of Chelsea and the business and the women's team in Strasbourg, is that why they're all split up individually, or is that for another reason?
That is to do the PSR window dressing that they did last year, right? In order to sell something to yourself, you had to create a separate entity that you still own, so it's still all under BLUECO 22 Limited. So they still own the assets, but they needed to buy the assets from Chelsea FC Holdings, right? So you had to set up a separate entity for the hotels to buy the hotels, for example, right? So that's all that is. But the problem is what we're going to get into now is the debt, right? Because remember, these guys
spoke about the debt a year ago. I remember this one.
There we go. So that's where we drop down in the diagram to that red writing next to 22 Holdco and to BLUECO 22.
I'd love to zoom in on that, but it won't let me zoom in for some reason.
Well, what's happening there? Remember, we only raised 2.5 billion so far, and we needed to raise 4.2 billion because they needed the 1.7 to invest in a stadium, the women's team, and youth development, right?
And that had to be proven before the purchase, yeah?
Absolutely. It was a requirement. That is in fact akin to what people call the anti-Glazer clause, right? Because the Glazers don't put investment into Manchester United. They simply leverage the revenues of the club. So the real anti-Glazer clause was Roman saying, oh, no, you can't take any money out. I'm actually going to make you put money in. And that's why he required them to put 1.7 billion And therefore, as we can see from here, Bowley was buying an asset that he personally could not afford. And therefore, they, along with Clearlake, formed 22 Holdco and went to Ares and said, we need some money. We need to find another 1.7 billion. Now, what is the difference between Ares? So Ares is a lender to 22 Holdco, right? So at the time, if anybody Googles it right now, they'll see that Ares and Chelsea, they'll see a £500 million deal being announced. That was the face value of the loan at the time.
Yep.
Now, they then therefore needed another 1.2 billion, right, to get to to get to the 1.7 that they needed. What I did not know when you and I were talking last year is that Clearlake and Bowley actually had 450 million pounds in their pocket set aside for this investment.
Okay,
so
that was personal cash.
Well, if you apply the percentages, the 61 point whatever percent to the 450 million, that would have been coming out of the two funds that we talked about earlier. So the Clearlake piece would have been coming out of those two funds, and then 34% would have been coming from the three original investors.
Right, that was an investment on top of what they'd already put in. I'm with you.
Right. So we are right now at 950 million they've been able to raise. Ares provided them with what's called private credit. So folks need to understand, when we talk about credit, we're talking about loans, liability section of the balance sheet. When we're talking about equity, we're talking about the owners, right, the shareholders of the business. In order to get money from JP Morgan and Bank of America, which are the two banks that they dealt with, those banks seem to have required, and when I say seem to, I mean, it's obvious from what's happened, where, remember, we raised 500 million from Ares. The owners putting 450 themselves, they're now short by 750 million. Okay. And the bank said, well, we need cash equity to be put into the structure for us to lend you that further 750 million. And that's why you have BLUECO 22 Limited being formed there. Because, and this complex and going to be difficult for people to get their heads around, right? But think about it as you wanting to buy your first home.
Sure.
And you go to your dad and you say, hey, look, I want to buy a home. My income is good enough now to support it. The bank is saying to me, though, that they want 20% cash down. And you go to your dad and you say, can you lend me the 20%? I'll pay you back over time. And your dad said, sure, here's the 20% of cash for you to put into your new home. Bringing that to this example, what we're saying here is that Bowley and Egbali formed 22 Holdco, went to Ares Management and said, look, we want to get this 750 million loan, but the bank is asking us to put 500 million of cash in it. Can you give us that 500 million so we can borrow the 750 million? So in other words, it's debt to get new debt. So leverage on leverage, which is obviously always, unless it's your father, a dangerous kind of situation, because both investors need to be paid back. Both lenders, I'm sorry.
So, okay. All right. I know we're going to talk about PIK loans in a second, because that was what I remember speaking about a year ago. I think that's important to understand, but just so I can get my head around this as well. So they had the money. They 300 million from Wiss, Walter, Bowley, 900 million, Clearlake, 1.6 billion. And that was enough to at least buy the club. But then you had the requirements in terms of spending as well, which is where they had extra cash that they put away. So how much cash, just to be clear, individually would Clearlake have had, and then Bowley's consortium had? Was it 450 each or 450 total?
450 total.
450 total. Okay, I'm with you. And Then you have the Ares loan of 500 million, and you have a loan from JP Morgan. Which loan was taken out first? Or are you saying that in order to take out one of the loans, they had to do another one?
It's the exact scenario with your father. The bank doesn't give you a mortgage unless you get that loan from your father for the 20% to deposit it with the bank first.
So did JP Morgan, so they had to take the loan with Ares to get JP Morgan to give them the money, or was it the opposite way around?
Exactly it. It's that, you got it the correct way the first time.
So JP, so Ares said, we'll help you if you get the money from JP.
So JP would have said, hey, we're going to lend you the money. We need to see some cash equity.
Sorry. So they had to get the money from Ares first. I'm with you.
Exactly. And that's why the Ares money maps to 22 Holdco, right? So 22 Holdco borrowed that money first. And just like you did with the 20%, went and deposited at the bank. Well, the way they did that was to form the entity underneath, BLUECO 22 Limited. And Ares 500 million was deposited in there as owner's equity.
And then JP Morgan 750, correct?
There we go. So I think that math should get you to 4.2 billion of all the pieces that we just described.
Wow, that's a lot of money. That's a lot. That's a lot. Okay. Okay, cool. So I'm just, I'm making notes on my notepad because I feel like this is not something that you can type. There's a lot of dots to connect there, but okay, it's starting to make a lot more sense now. I mean, when we spoke a year ago, myself, you and Ruben, it was all about, I mean, Ares was the big one, right? Because like you mentioned earlier, they wouldn't lend the 500 million without JP Morgan getting involved in the first place, and that's what we call a PIK loan, which is a payment in kind loan. So that's the example that you were saying that's similar to me going to a family member to get money for a mortgage, and then if I had that deposit, the bank would then lend me the money as well. Yeah, correct.
Correct. And if we could just follow the theme of the investment with your father to make this relatable, your father might have said to you, okay, son, here's the 20% cash, but you don't have to pay me back for 10 years.
Sure.
But because I want to keep you focused on your investment and your responsibilities, I'm going to charge you interest, son. So they got into, so your father would have set an interest rate, and you will see in the red writing there next to 22 Holdco, something called SONIA. And this is what confuses people, what SONIA is. It's an acronym. It's a UK acronym, but it's basically the overnight lending rate that the UK government borrows money.
Right.
Okay. So every night that interest rate changes. So that's how you create a floating interest rate, by saying SONIA plus 7.5% as a spread. So put a diagram there. You're seeing 12 points.
So you're saying that the interest can change at any time?
It changes every day.
So you're saying one day they'll pay 7%, the next day they could pay 8% interest?
Well, yeah, interest rates are not going to rise by 100 basis points overnight, but in principle, that's what we're saying. So that
theoretically speaking, though, right? So that interest rate is not reliable. It could go up or down.
It is risky, correct. So you could have a situation where the interest rate balloons, right? So over time, it's not going to move by that much overnight, but in a year it could, right? So you see that 12.73% there next to the Ares loan in the red writing.
Yeah.
So that is a combination of the overnight lending rate and the 7.5% at the point in time that Greg Cordell produced this exhibit. That was the interest rate at the date that he produced this exhibit. So,
okay, so when they took the loan out, then it was SONIA, which again was the we'll just call it a versatile interest
floating rate.
Floating rate. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then it says PIK 12.73% as of the end of December 2024.
So you take the overnight lending rate. Anybody in the chat can now Google SONIA and see what the rate is today.
Oh yeah, please check that. Let us know.
Right. So you just have to do a quick Google SONIA rate, and so you just add then 7.5% on whatever that rate is. So the SONIA rate last night, just checking very quickly. SONIA rate today was, so the SONIA rate last night was 3.729%. So you add 7.5% to that to get what the prevailing interest rate that was charged by Ares.
7.50%, yeah?
Yeah, which is right there in the red writing. So the last night rate, so add 7.5% to 3.729%.
And they pay that in installments, or is that in one lump sum?
No, this is where the paid in kind comes in. So you see that PIK concept there, right? Okay. 3.72. Wait, hold on. I'm just doing a quick calculation here. I do have my calculator handy. So the rate. Sorry, my calculator. 3.72 plus. Right. So the rate last night was just over 11%. Right. So that's what Ares charged last night. So that's like your father saying, hey, you don't have, the way the PIK works is that you don't have to pay me back, right? What you can do, if you don't pay me back, I'm charging you an 11% interest rate on the 20% that I gave you as the cash deposit. But if you don't pay me back, the amounts that you don't pay me back also attract 11% for the entire 10 years. So what we're talking about here is that Ares does not ask to be paid. It's called flexible financing.
Yeah,
I think it's appropriate financing for a football club, quite frankly, and we can get into that in detail another time as a more technical discussion. But effectively, what we're saying is that Ares is expecting a 3 times return in 10 years on that 500 million.
So they want 1.5 billion back.
They expect, if interest rates, remember this rate is moving constantly, right? So if we were to project last night's rate, or the rate for the average rate for the last 4 years, it's going to be 1.5 billion that they are going to own Ares, because they obviously don't have the cash to pay Ares right now.
Right, I'm with you. Yeah, I see. And that's why the interest is so important, because it's over such a long period of time. If that was a regular loan with, let's just say it was 100 million loan, just to keep it simple, with 10% interest, obviously you'd only pay 10 million extra. But because it's accumulating over such a long period of time, that's why it's such a huge number to go from 500 to 1.5 billion, because otherwise it would be ridiculous. But I mean, that puts them in
interest on interest. You're paying interest on interest.
Interest on interest. Yes, I'm with you. And what happens if they can't pay off that interest?
Well, Ares is a very clever firm. Their private credit portfolio includes John Textor.
The Crystal Palace, well, the guy used to own
Eagle Holdings, correct. So Leon and Botafogo and Crystal Palace and those investments. These loans, if you don't manage them properly, if the CFO of Chelsea is not managing it properly, there's something called an interest rate escalator, for example, where every 6 months the interest rate goes up by 1% if you don't meet certain conditions of the loan. So Ares is not just sitting there allowing Igbali to do as he pleases with their money. He needs to stick within certain what's called loan to value ratios, meaning the value of the asset relative to the value of the loan. He has to comply with certain debt service coverage ratios. So in other words, is the club generating enough money to cover any loan payments that are due to the banks? Not to Ares, because they obviously don't need a payback until 2033. So there are penalties in there that allows Ares to increase the amount of money owed to them. And there's also an important feature in those in their investment, in their loan. And people will be confused. Sometimes you see it being described as subordinated debt. Sometimes you see it being described as preferred shares. And that's because this loan has what is called a convertible feature, which allows Ares, if certain conditions are not met, to convert their debt to equity and therefore control the club.
Yes, subordinated debt. I remember you telling me about this, and that's where it's different to, shall we say, a PIK. That it's not the same. Or would you say?
It is the same. It is the same. It is the same. It is the same. And when we talk about subordination, right, what we're talking about is who gets paid first if the club is liquidated. So the senior debt is the debt in BLUECO 22 Limited, that the 750 million that they got from JP Morgan and Bank of America. Senior means we get paid first if there's a bankruptcy, right? Subordinated means you're just subordinated to the senior lender. So you get paid, they get paid after JP Morgan and Bank of America. This is what you call mezzanine financing. So mezzanine meaning it sits between traditional debt, like the bank loans, and the owner's equity. So it sits in the middle there. But for all intents and purposes, we should treat that as equity for BLUECO 22 Limited. Did I confuse you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to. I'm with you on the PIK. I'm with you on subordinated debt. It means that if for whatever reason they can't pay back the money, then Ares can take over the club. I'm just trying to understand. So what is the order in terms of who gets paid first? You're saying JP Morgan gets paid first or Ares gets paid first?
JP Morgan and Bank of America get paid first.
JP Morgan and Bank of America. I didn't even realize Bank of America, right? Of America.
So they get their 750 million first.
Right. I'm with you. Okay.
Okay. And then Ares gets paid next.
And why does JP Morgan get paid before Ares? Why is that?
Because whenever you go, because they're charging a lower interest rate. So borrowing from a bank is the cheapest form of financing. So if you look at the red writing next to BLUECO 22 Limited, Greg has not put the total there, but you would have to add 3.25% to SONIA, right? So the interest rate on that debt, let's just do that very quickly.
Around 6-7%.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Cool.
So they're taking, because they get paid first, they charge a lower interest rate for the risk that they're taking.
Because they know they're going to get the money beforehand. I see. And that's why then you get a higher interest from Ares, because there's more uncertainty as to whether they can get paid. But then this is where I again would say I'm a little bit confused, is if JP Morgan and Bank of America would get paid first, why don't they get to take over the club instead of Ares? Is that just because it's not because it's not subordinated debt, because it's not a PIK loan?
Correct. So Ares has built into their debt a feature that allows them to convert their debt to shares in the club, owner shares, right? So the banks don't have that. Now, to the extent that the value of Chelsea, suppose Chelsea can't pay back the debts. And actually, this is an important point. JP Morgan and Bank of America, that facility was taken out in 2022. And it needs to be repaid in 5 years. That's next year, 2027. Okay.
Yeah.
So they, or it needs to be refinanced. So these guys need to go. BLUECO 22 Limited needs to go back to the two banks and say, hey, can you renew the 750 million? Because they've not paid back any of the principal. They've just been paying interest, the approximate 6% that we just worked out. Okay, just over 6%. That's close to 7, right? So they are, that's up for renewal next year, and that renewal, if they don't renew it, or if they ask for more collateral, could trigger the option that Ares has to convert their debt to equity.
And this is a conversation I had with Ruben the other day, which is that, well, I feel like he's under the impression that they won't do that they'd happily just lend more money and do it that way. Is that correct?
Yeah, because look, the banks know. You see, when you're borrowing money at this scale, your bank becomes a business partner. So I would always argue, if you're going to borrow money, borrow big, because the bank becomes your business partner. They have a vested interest in you not going under. And those two banks know that if they demand cash of 750 million next year, it's going to just collapse the entire structure, because the club only, in the financial statements had something like 129 million pounds of cash on hand.
Right.
So they can't pay that next year. So now what's also important to note, and to get back to an earlier question you asked, can the individual assets in this structure be sold? And the answer is no, because the two senior banks hold an interest in so they hold the shares of BLUECO 22 Limited, and they also have what's called a floating charge on all of the assets underneath it. So
this is crazy though, Bobby, because this goes against the so when we say we can sell, it's only that we can sell if we pay back the money that was lent to us. Well, if Clearlake, if BLUECO pay back the money that they borrowed.
Let me put that a different way. If they were to try to sell Strasbourg, for example, they would have to pay back JP Morgan and Bank of America first, because right now the floating charge would attach to Strasbourg as an asset. So they cannot sell Strasbourg individually. They can sell BLUECO 22 Limited, right? So a new buyer can come out. The buyer might just buy out the Aries, Clearlake, and Bowley Group and leave the bank debt in place, assuming it gets renewed next year. Somebody can do that. But what I'm talking about is selling individual assets underneath BLUECO 22 Limited. That is not possible unless you pay back JP Morgan and Bank of America.
So let's just say they, Strasbourg's probably a good example. They sell their shares of Strasbourg, whatever it is. Let's just say they get, I don't know, 100 million for it. Then in that case, all of that money would go to JP Morgan.
Yeah, in theory. The best way to think about it is that they cannot sell this structure piecemeal. So the fears that anybody might have had that they've separated the hotels to sell them off, can't do that, because the banks have a lien on those assets, can't be sold until the banks are satisfied that they can be repaid.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm with you.
Okay. So I think just to recap then, I mean, I'm not sure how long you want to go. I know your shows are usually an hour. I'm happy to stay, by the way, we can keep going.
Well, I do have, no, I'm pretty relaxed. I'm quite happy to go a bit longer. That's not a problem. I'm not streaming daily anymore, Bobby. So, when I have to stream for a bit longer, that's not a problem. There was a time I was doing 2 1-hour streams every single day, and I was a bit more stringent, but now I'm not doing it that much. I do have, there was a comment from someone, I've lost it, but it was basically saying if Aries took over, we'd be screwed. Do you agree with that?
No, and I think when we get together,
this one, if we get taken over for relegation, that's the one.
Yeah, I don't agree with that necessarily, because look, there's several examples here, right? And there's a live example going on. So we need to remember that the John Textor situation, John Textor borrowed money from Aries, right? And right now, his holding company is in administration. Has nothing to do with Leon, the club itself, right? Leon is operating as normal. What we're talking about is changes of ownership, owners going bankrupt. So let's say the Glazers themselves, because of their other business activity, went bankrupt. That has nothing to do with the solvency of Manchester United, right? Yeah. So Aries foreclosing on Clearlake and Bowley doesn't really mean anything for Chelsea. And frankly, and it's always been my view, that is actually the only way that we can get rid of these guys, is that Aries takes over and puts the club up for sale, as they're doing with Leon right now.
And that's Leon's on the market, is it?
Yep, they just got put on the auction block yesterday. So the club is continuing to compete. I think they're 5th place in League One. So business as usual at a football and a club level. But Aries is telling John Textor, hey, you can pay me back. So I'm selling your clubs. And John Textor is left with nothing. So under that scenario, this is where the 2.5 billion from the owners could evaporate. And going back to who gets paid first, the JP Morgan, Bank of America first, then Aries, then Clear Lake, then Bully. So Bully is the last to get paid if the club is sold at less than they bought it for. He gets hurt the most.
And this is the other thing that I would say, though, Bobby, is that obviously he has to sign off any of any sale. So it's in his vested interest, obviously, for the club to get sold, so that he's able to make money as well, if that was the case. But where I mean, this is my personal opinion, is that I don't believe Bowley wants to sell. I think he wants to be a part of Chelsea for many, many years, and that's where I think it gets a little bit interesting, because you could have a situation where Clear Lake are very happy with an offer from someone, but you don't get that same enthusiasm from someone like Bowley. But in that case, let's say an offer came in, JP Morgan get paid, Bank of America get paid, Aries get paid, Clear Lake take out their money, and Bowley could potentially still be involved in the football club. That there is potentially a chance that could happen alongside another partner. The other side is that they can't pay back the money they owe with Aries, and then Aries have the right to say, right, you're not doing. It's like John Textor. We're going to sell Chelsea, and in that case, they could still get some money out of it, if I'm right in saying, but the majority of those proceeds would go to Aries. Is that fair?
No, so I would recharacterize that actually. Bully is the reason why a sale cannot happen.
Right. Okay.
Because he's the last to get paid. So if the club is sold for anything less than 4.2 billion, he doesn't get any money. So he will never agree. Sorry, if it gets sold for less than if it gets sold for less than 3.3 billion, which is the 4.2 minus 9, right? If it gets sold for anything less than that, it comes out of his pockets. So he will never agree to a sale. He will only agree to a sale. They will only agree to a sale if they're forced to. And the only way they'll be forced to is Aries converting its debt to equity and putting the club up for sale, or the banks feeling that they can't get their money back and they themselves do the foreclosure, which would hurt Aries, Bully, and Clear Lake.
Oh, hang on. So now the banks can get involved. Oh, we haven't spoken about that.
We kind of did, because it's just unlikely, right? They're so, to Ruben's point,
because they're business partners. Yes, no, you did mention that.
Well, not only that, it's just that they've only put in 750 million, right? And the value of Chelsea is never gonna. So Chelsea is never gonna sell for less than 750 million. Right. So the banks are pretty guaranteed that they're gonna get their money back. Now, sure. Can Chelsea be sold for 4.2 billion? I don't think so. And here's why. I think they overpaid as a starting point. So this notion that it was a distressed asset and they were all eager to pay up. Roman went away laughing. Very few people sell a football club at a profit. He managed to. But what I'm saying is, for Spurs, before this credit crisis, Spurs was up for sale for 4 billion, and they have a stadium valued with a replacement cost of probably 1.5 billion at this point. Okay. Right. So they have a stadium that generates hard dollars, and they're valued at 4 billion. Chelsea doesn't have a stadium. It's a name, some players' contracts, a few hotels, and a car park. They don't even own the pitch. So to the notion that because of the location of Chelsea in London, okay, great, it's prime real estate, but how much real estate is there? Certainly at 4 billion, right? Or 1.5 billion, right? Hotels are not valued anywhere near to that. So this is where we have to question the valuation. Right now, JP Morgan has said, we don't trust valuations from these private equity firms any longer. So we're not lending to this space anymore. So they're going to have a really interesting conversation with JP Morgan next year. To Ruben's point, I think JP Morgan will renew, because anything else would cause an immediate bankruptcy. But right now, they're going to hold their noses to renew this loan next year. Nobody wants to touch this stuff because they think the valuations are flawed.
Okay, and so when the loans are renewed, is that an additional? What are we talking?
It remains the same number. They'll just renew it for the same 750 million and continue to pay.
Then they would have taken out
interest.
over $1 billion with the bank. Okay.
No, it's the same number, right? So it's the same 750 million. They're just rolling it over for another 5 years.
Okay. They're just delaying the payment. I'm with you.
Correct. They're just not paying any principal. They just continue to pay interest only until 2033. So everybody, the only people that are getting money out of this right now is JP Morgan and Bank of America in interest, because they're a traditional, it's a traditional term loan. Ares and Clear Lake investors, and to something you said earlier, if you think about the fact that Ares is getting 12%, but they get paid before Clear Lake investors, Ares wants a 3 times return. What does Clear Lake's investors want? What has Iqbali promised to his investors? Because they're going to be demanding a better return than Ares, because they get paid off to Ares. They have the biggest exposure in this asset.
And what do you think that number would be?
Private equity investors typically over 15%.
15?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Oh.
So as a rule of thumb, right, just for you personal investing, any loan that has an 8% interest rate doubles in 10 years. So you can put that into any future value calculator. Anything earning 8%, any principal that's earning 8% doubles in value in 10 years. So that's where you get these multiples based on these interest rates, right? People don't focus on the math.
5% or something, a little bit over what the banks were going to. But that's 5 times. That's ridiculous.
Oh, they could lose all their money, right? And that's why they want a quick payback. They could lose their money.
The flip side is, though, well, I mean, if I was, let's just say I was an investor with Clear Lake and I was actually a football fan as well, and I was keeping up to date, I mean, I'd be thinking right now, there's no way I'm getting a 15x return. I mean, that's just impossible. It looks like Chelsea's not worth much more than they paid for. There's an argument there might be worth less because we're in a much worse position on a footballing level. And so, I'd just be looking to get my money, just not lose it. I mean, so I find it ridiculous how they could expect a 15x return. But I mean, based on
not 15 times return, a 15% yield.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
15. Not 15 times. Sorry, 15% as the interest rate and above. Okay. Sorry, mate. Sorry, not 15.
No, that makes sense. No. I was thinking, my God, this is like
no,
a crypto coin.
No, you're talking about 5 times, 5x, 6x up in those regions.
Okay, that's about what I expected then. Still a large amount, but that yeah, okay. I mean, it's still very unrealistic though. I mean, what would that value the club at then if we had a 3x from Ares?
Well, let's do this a different way. I see where you're going with it. Yeah. So look, just as a rule of thumb, right? To understand this particular investment, the average interest rate between the 2 banks and Ares, the weighted average of interest rate has been around 10% for the last 4 years. So if you just do a rough calculation of what everybody has put in, and you assume that Ares and the Bank of America and JP Morgan get their interest rate, and you assume that Clear Lake investors take a haircut and they accept the same 3x that, less than 3x. So let's assume they are going to accept a 10% return on their investment, and that bully does not want a return. He just wants his principal back. If you work through all of that math, it becomes a value of £9 billion that they need to sell the club for in 2033.
9 billion valuation, and that's without Burley making a penny.
That is Bully just getting his 300 million back.
My God. So what we're saying is that the banks would be getting 2.25 billion, and then
let's not try to do this math on here. I mean, I could send you an exhibit to show you how you do it.
Right.
Because I do have a post where
sorry, my fault. So Aries would get they'd get 1.5 billion, right? And then you'd have
Clear Lake is going to get something like 5.5 based on everything that they've put in.
Christ. That's crazy. Because the last time we spoke, Bobby, we were talking about 7 billion. And so in the space of a year, we've had these these other things that have come to fruition, and we've gone up 2 billion without Bowling making a penny.
Yeah, but this is because they've put in the 450 million as well, right? So that also has a kind of multiplier on it, the 450 million. So that's added to the pot. When I spoke to you last year, I was not aware of the 450 million. It was not in the financial statements. I only discovered that because it's in the 2025 financial statements. So that's how we're now up to 9 billion. But look, and we're going to deal with this in the next part of our 3-part series, which is they have lost in 3 years and 2 months 1.8 billion pounds. That is more money than the Clear Lake investors put in. That is more money than Roman required them to put in. So we've not even factored in that they have to recover that money, right, in order to support a £9 billion valuation. So it's a bit of a mess. I don't see how this works. I've seen people floating ideas that Chelsea would be worth 15 billion if there was a Netflix style, kind of like what Bowley negotiated in terms of TV rights. That to me is speculative. I don't know if there are negotiations going on in the background as to the next TV deal and how that will be structured. But I think that's the thesis that the business plan is operating on. The question is, can the club survive until then, right? So Not a Project CFC published a blog yesterday.
Yes.
And in that blog, they talked about the fact that the club is losing 57 million per month, right? And that's the accounting losses.
Oh my
that's not the important, well, not the club itself, well, the group, right? Strasbourg and women's teams and Chelsea included, right?
Right. That's all one thing. Okay, I'm with you.
But the important number for me is the cash burn, right? So how much cash is Egbali burning? And he's burning 43.5 million pounds per month in cash out the door. So forget amortization and all these accounting entries that are not really cash entries, right? And if you just think the cash used to operate the club with the monstrosity that they've built between Strasbourg and Chelsea, they're consuming 43.5 million pounds a month.
43.5 million a month. My God.
And we'll dig into that next time we speak, right? That is a club level issue. This is not about the ownership and the bankruptcy of the holding company anymore. This is that, hey, this club is burning more cash every year than it is generating in top line revenue.
I mean, this is an interesting comment as well from Free Minded. It says Real Madrid is valued at approximately, this is, so 5.9 million in, so not dollars, making it the most valuable football club for the 4th consecutive year. So when we're talking about Chelsea potentially, needing to be worth 9 billion for it to be worth anything to the people invested in it, I mean, it's just totally unrealistic. It's totally unrealistic. It makes you think that
It makes you think. If I'd be laughing if I was Aries, maybe not so much if I was JP Morgan, although it's fine for them. They're not going to lose anything. But I mean, you've got to be seriously concerned if you're part of Clear Lake. But obviously, the fact that Bowley doesn't have to necessarily sell his shares. Well, hang on. I don't want to confuse.
No, he doesn't. I know where you're going with this. There's a faint hope that Bowley can be the surviving shareholder. I don't see that. I don't see that scenario.
You don't see that happening. Okay.
I don't see. I based on the mechanics of what's going on here. Frankly, I don't think he should be anyway. I mean, people like the spending that he did and the fact that he likes to spend, but he's the person that created this problem.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
He blew. I mean, the arrogance to think you can come in and be sporting director and spend the money the way he did, money that should have been going towards the stadium, by the way. He blew a massive hole in the balance sheet. And then it is clear that Eghbali moved on him, seized control, and Eghbali has been executing a very flawed recovery strategy ever since. Eghbali doesn't understand how to make money in football, right? He sees a market of players that seems a bit disorganized, and he felt he can come in and teach Europeans how to transfer players. Well, as it turns out, he's basically been robbed, right? Because I think the value for the money that we've spent, nobody's seeing it, right? So he thought he was clever than everybody else, came in. So sorry, Bowley, I don't even know if he was thinking. I don't even know who does that. I don't accept the excuses that he could not find a qualified CEO to run this business. But he didn't, and he blew up the balance sheet. Eghbali has been executing a recovery strategy ever since. I think both of them are disqualified from owning this club, in my personal opinion. And he can't spend money he doesn't have anyway. So bringing him back as the sole owner makes no difference. He never had the money in the first place.
So there's no world in which you think Clear Lake are out the door. We pay off our loans, and Bowley stays in. I'm certainly not saying I want that to happen. I'm just saying theoretically.
Look, there are obviously lots of agreements that we are not seeing, right? Things that are separate from the Articles of Association. What we do know, and there was a chap, Quinn, who published a piece yesterday, which I've been retweeting. And just to get his name is Paul Quinn. He actually did a deep dive into the financials of Aries and their funds, and he discovered these mechanisms to seize ownership. And if Aries were to do that, they'll be moving proportionally on both of the two shareholders of 22 Holdco. So
well, actually, wouldn't that mean that Bowley's more at risk because he's got Class B shares, right?
Correct. He's the one that gets. If Aries moved on 22 Holdco and put it up for sale, and then they were short money, that comes out of the Bowley Group's pocket. And
Bowley can't do anything. Clearly can't do anything about how much the club is sold for, because all Aries care about is getting their money back. So if Clear Lake and Bowley come out empty-handed, that doesn't mean anything.
They don't give a shit. But I think from our perspective as fans, we want that, right? Because every penny that needs to be paid back to Bowley and to Clear Lake's investors is money that can't be put. Well, I mean, it doesn't come out of the revenues of the club, right? But the club is constantly under pressure to generate cash flows. And these guys felt that the best way to do that is to flip players, which has obviously not been working for the last 4 years.
No.
Right? They've generated tremendous losses, right?
And just to be clear as well, amortization means nothing, yeah?
Amortization is a joke for when you're talking about value in a club. It's a non-cash item. When you're valuing a club, you're looking at cash flows.
Why don't you just explain amortization for those people who don't understand how it works?
Sure. So with the amortization rules, and I need to be careful how I say this, you can sell a an asset that you have for own use, so a player, you can sell a player at an accounting profit, but make an economic loss at the same time. So
Enzo Fernandez would be a good example, right?
Correct. If Enzo Fernandez is sold for less than his purchase price, that's an economic loss. You have actually, it's like going to the stock market. You would not buy, if you were to go and buy a share in Google right now, you expect to then sell that share for more than you bought it for, right? To generate a positive cash flow. If you were to sell Enzo Fernandez in June for £80 million, his amortized book value is currently would be around 70 million. So you would book a £10 million profit. But when you're looking at valuing the club, you've sold Enzo Fernandez for less cash than you paid for him. And in any world, buying an asset and selling it for less creates a cash deficit, right? So
the only way amortization is the only meaning it would have is if you knew you were going to have the club anyway. But when you know that you have to raise capital in order to then pay back the money you borrowed, that's when it becomes a problem.
Right. So let's just, I didn't dive into the explanation of amortization. Let me try to make it real with a real life example. So let's say you want to buy a nice car. You want to pay £50 million for this car. You intend to own this car for 5 years. What the accounting rules do, and it's accepted by PSR, is that you don't expense all £50,000 in the first year, because you expect to drive that car for 5 years. So when you prepare your personal financial statement, what you're going to show is your income and then an expense for your vehicle of only £10,000 per year. Right. Because you're amortizing it. You're amortizing that cost over 5 years. You're not pushing it through in the first year.
Sure.
So if you decide to sell the car in year 3, that means that you have expensed £30,000, £10,000 a year for the 3 years of amortization, which means the book value of your car at the end of the year 3 is £20,000. So if you sell the car at the end of year 3 for £25,000, you have made a £5,000 accounting profit because you've sold the car for more than its amortized value. So that's why when people talk, oh, we sold this player and we made a profit. Well, is it an accounting profit or did you make a positive return on investment? Because you have not made a positive return on investment on that car because it's a depreciating asset. It's now valued way less than you paid for it, but you're making more money than you're carrying it on your personal balance sheet. So you will show in your IFRS accounting, in your IFRS financial statements, that you made a £5,000 profit. But factually, you sold that car for less, for 50% of its original value.
It's crazy. No, I'm with you with amortization. Hopefully that gives a little bit more clarity. CFC Clo 8848 says, where do we go from here then? We need to spend lots to get better.
Stay tuned for part 3. I think we'll chat about that then.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And look, that's where I'm not calling necessarily for the bankruptcy of 22 Colco. What I'm saying is that on the current trajectory, I cannot the club. So effectively, right? They've made 1.8 billion of losses in 3 years and 2 months, right? The balance sheet cannot tolerate that level of losses. Eventually, the equity runs out. So there's only £1 billion of equity left.
I suppose if you had an owner
Abramovich is a great example, who was willing to dig into his own pockets to then bring more cash into the fold, it would be absolutely fine, and amortization would be relevant, because it's like, cool, we're managing the club in a way that we can continue to invest. I suppose it'd be the same for a club run with, by PAF and the Saudis. They're very happy to spend, but when you have a fund which is closed and when you've run out of money to spend, that's when the economic loss, like you were saying, is relevant, and amortization means absolutely nothing.
Exactly right. That's the point. Because when they value the club to come to £9 billion in 6 years, what they're going to look at is the cash flows, this triple amortization. Okay, they want to say, what are the core earnings of this business? How much cash is it generating? Oh shit, it's been generating, it's been burning £43.5 million a year. That's negative, right? So if you try to put a negative value in a future value calculator, it kind of doesn't work, right? So because it can't be valued for less than zero, but that's effectively what a negative return does in a future value calculator.
JC says, isn't it a case of too big to fail already in terms of sums involved for Ares? For JP Morgan, this must be peanuts.
No peanuts, mate. Look, any negative return is going to pull down the value of the club, right? A bank does not want to do write-downs on its loans. So look, and this is where the bankruptcy point comes in. This is what happened at Inter Milan. This is what happened at AC Milan, where the original owners who had no business owning those clubs, so similar to our owners, the equivalent of Ares moved in, squeezed them out. And in the instance of Oaktree and Inter Milan, what they did was to appoint very good football men. So I think Zanetti is the vice president, for example, people with a connection to the club, people who understand Italian football. And they're always at the top of the league. And it was only this year they had a bad run in the Champions League, but the year before they did quite well. So you have that type of, that Ares type, the Oaktree, who gave them the private credit and who's now prepared to own that asset and bring it back up to value through success on the pitch. Ares has taken a different approach with John Textor. They've seized his clubs, but they have immediately put them up for sale. And you would have heard me mention a credit crisis that's going on. It's not obvious to everyone, but these private equity firms are under severe pressure because they have reportedly 30,000 businesses globally that they cannot sell.
30,000?
A hella number of businesses. Yep, 30,000. So, I mean, it's nobody will know the number. I think if you Google that right now, you might be able to see some sort of speculation that, or a report saying that there's about 30,000 private equity businesses up for sale. And what's been happening is that they've been selling them to each other.
That's what we've been doing. Okay, that's not a new trick then.
So this is in the big private equity world in general. Now, if you and I say, look, Jesus, we want to get the value of Chelsea Fan TV up, Neil. Can you pay me an inflated price for my business? Right, so I can get out of this position, and then I'll return the favor to you. I'll take another business off you for an inflated price. So you've got this kind of matrix, and that's why JP Morgan has come out and said, hey, we don't trust valuations in this space anymore. So that is a big hurdle that BLUECO will need to overcome next year when they try to renew this facility, because JP Morgan has said, we're not touching anything backed by private equity anymore. Any structure that's dependent on private credit, we're out. So obviously they'll need to maintain their existing positions, right? Because pulling the plug on Chelsea now is going to hurt them more than it helps, given their seniority in the structure. So nobody trusts these valuations anymore. And that's really what all these, so Ares themselves are under pressure. They're investors. Their fund had to put what's called a gate on redemptions, meaning it has limited investor redemptions to, I think, 15%, and told people, hey, you can't get back your money right now because we can't sell the loans that we or the businesses that we're repossessing. And that's what prompted them to move so aggressively on John Textor, because they need cash to fund their redemptions.
Right. Yeah, okay, I'm with you. And so when you look at Chelsea, do you think that they would do the same thing, or do you think they would run it like Inter Milan?
Depends on their liquidity, right, themselves. So if they're under pressure by their investors to hand money back, they'll have to put it up for sale. If they're in a position where their investors are not demanding money back, they'll be like Oaktree and say, hey, we're prepared to wait for you to not up Bowley. We don't have to pay back Bowley, and we don't have to pay back Clear Lake. Let's get some new investment into the club, buy some proper players, appoint some proper football people to manage the club, and let's get the name back up and build out brand value the way Roman did. That is the best way for them to extract themselves from it, but they might not have the patience. Their investors might not have the patience for it.
Right, I'm with you, and I would imagine that, I mean, the way the market's looking at the moment, it probably would be a case of the investors wanting their money ASAP. That would be my guess.
Look, it's not going to be reported, because the only reason we know so much about Aries is because they're publicly listed in the US. Clear Lake is not. But I have no doubt that their investors are saying, hey, we kind of want our money back. We know we can't get it, but as soon as you can, but we're certainly not giving you any more money. But as soon as we can get the F out of here, please, let's do that.
And would you say there's a rough timeline in terms of when Chelsea fans can realistically expect some sort of change? Because obviously we know about the 10-year the 10-year clause, which they can still sell regardless. But I mean, if you had to take a guess, how long would you say until we've got some sort of change?
Well, the only way they can pay back Aries is from the sale of the club, and Aries needs to be repaid by August 2033. So that's a drop dead date for everything. Club needs to be put up for sale by 2033, right? To
still a long time though, isn't it? I mean, still
years, yeah.
It's a long time. And I mean, do you have any confidence anything could be done before then?
So they got another 7 years to run. Now, what could happen before then is next year, right? So we got to run for 7 years to mid 2033. So what we're saying is the two banks though need to be renewed next year. Now, what I'm expecting to happen is that those banks will renew, but they'll renew at a better interest rate for them, so a higher interest rate. And they'll probably want to have, I don't know how the security works, but they would want to attach a bigger interest in the value of the club than they would have in 2022. So let me make that real for you. So when your dad gave you the 20% to get 80% from the bank,
right?
That was what you call an 80% LTV for the bank, loan to value ratio, right? Sure. So their loan was 80%, and obviously the mortgage is 100%. So the loan to value ratio is 80%.
Right.
Right. If you never pay the mortgage for whatever reason, and the value of the property drops, right? That loan to value percentage changes, because the amount of money that was loaned is fixed, but if the value of the property drops, that percentage then becomes more than 80%, and that becomes intolerable. So what you would have is Aries would be looking at that and saying, if the banks are asking for a better loan to value ratio, that leaves them at a worse loan to value ratio themselves in their subordinated position. I know I used a lot of jargon there, but conceptually just focus on the 80% value of the asset moving, and that could trigger next year an event where Aries could move, but I do think it's unlikely.
So the earliest possible time would be next year in 2027.
July 2027 is when the term loan comes up for renewal with Bank of America and JP Morgan. Yes. What can we see this summer? If they get through this summer without selling 2 or 3 first team starters, I'll be shocked. And the reason why I say this is every July 1st of every year, Eghbali knows that he is short by £200 million.
That's why the Club World Cup was obviously massive for us.
Right, exactly. And by the way, that Club World Cup, I mean, people talk about it, but half that money was booked in that loss that we're seeing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So because remember, the Club World Cup straddles the year end, so they prize money before I believe the knockout phase needed to be recorded, plus the appearance fee. It's important to understand that they now have to sell players to make up the loss, right? Because right now they're bleeding cash, and all of the credit lines are currently maxed out, right? So they had not drawn on all of the JP Morgan, they had not drawn on all of Ares last year. There was still room, but those are now completely exhausted. So like your credit card maxed out, but you need to continue buying food. And that's the situation that they're in. So they're just going to have to sell players to fill that deficit. And they actually need to sell even more players to get into a profit situation.
And this is presumably where Strasbourg becomes even more important to them.
Well, apparently Strasbourg has got like 50 players on their roster. So that's all those kids out there. I think what these guys have not, the 2 major mistakes they made with their model, they assume that all players develop in a straight line, which we have been around long enough to know does not happen. I mean, how many 19-year-olds, lose their value by the time they get to 25, right?
Sure.
Because they just don't develop how you expect.
Yeah.
And those players aren't actually playing enough competitive football because these squads are so big. So they're just hanging around the training ground, training and playing in development leagues and whatever. That is not helping the development or the value of these players. So I think that in of itself is a problem they have to resolve. The next thing that they have to resolve, and this is a more technical point, there's something called the Diarra rule. So I don't know if you remember the player Lassana Diarra, who used to
played for Real Madrid. Yeah, played for us as well.
So he got into a dispute with the Lokomotiv, or one of those Russian clubs, and he unilaterally ripped up his contract.
How does that work?
Well, he said, "I'm done. I'm walking away. I wanted to transfer. You wouldn't transfer me. I'm done. I'm walking away." And he didn't turn up.
Wow. Okay.
And then he basically then, the club then obviously sued him. The club would have been in a dispute. He walked out of his contract. They paid a transfer fee for him, and he's now gone. And he's gone because they wouldn't transfer him. So there was a big case that went through the European courts in relation to him. And the courts ruled that players are employees and therefore have a choice of employer.
Oh, my God.
Yep. This only happened recently, within the last 2 years. And FIFA enacted a new rule called Article 17 that allows for a protected period of 3 years. But after that, a player, in theory, can tear up their contract. And the only thing the club will be entitled to is compensation that's been calculated by a particular body, right? A decision-making, an arbitrator, if you like, within FIFA. And so this is where I think these Clearlake guys, with
they
this
must be shitting themselves, Bobby.
They have to be. And this is why Enzo Fernandez, and people think it's not real. Look at Isak, right? There's an article on Isak, which I can send to you afterwards. I post about it quite a bit, where there's a little known rule, is the title of the article, that allowed Isak to leave Newcastle United.
And that's how it happened, because of the
3 years. Exactly.
Oh my God. This is ridiculous.
Newcastle
I had no idea about this. That means the whole 7-8 year contract is totally pointless. We just shot ourselves in the foot.
It is a horrifically structured deal that favors the player. Because here's what the player knows. Any player, this is why they love coming to Chelsea. If I can get a nice 9-year contract, and if I get a bad injury, they still have to pay me. But if I want to leave in 3 years, I can say, hey guys, you need to transfer me. And the club is obliged to take the highest price offered in the market. That is why Newcastle did not get £150 million. Although that's what we ain't going to sell until we get £150. Liverpool took their sweet ass time and said, hey, unless you can get somebody to beat 120 million, he's our player. And that's exactly what happened.
And sorry, so when you look at the valuation of Isak, so where did that come from?
He transferred for £125 million. If you were following the Newcastle story last year, they were claiming to be demanding £150 million for a player that they claimed was under contract.
Yeah.
And he was under contract. The fact is the Diarra ruling made the contract pointless and useless after 3 years. So you were actually giving the players a long-term contract with an embedded option to terminate early in favor of the player, because the club either accepts the highest bid it gets or it accepts compensation as devised by the arbitrator, and it's way lower than the transfer fee.
So if you've got a player like Caicedo, right, who spends 3 years at Chelsea and then renews his contract, does that start again from zero?
It does. So if he extends now, he's locked in for another 3 years, and this is why, quite frankly,
why it's so important for him to sign a new deal, and this is why Palmer signing a new deal was really important.
Well, him sign, so which means that Palmer doesn't extend until 2027.
Another 2 years, right?
Possibly, yeah, because I think he renewed in 2024. And that's why Enzo Fernandez is basically saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to my dream club if I want to. You can't do anything about it.
Shit.
Okay. Cucurella, he renewed, but he didn't extend. I don't know how that works. But the way we need to think about this is that we need to take a step back and say, look, a club is not going to allow a player to walk for an arbitrated fee. We are better off just selling the player if he wants to go and get the highest price that we can get for them. So Newcastle did the intelligent thing. I don't know how the Wiesel situation worked out, but to cut a long story short, these are long contracts with an embedded option in favor of the player. So the protection
has no control of that.
The club has no control about it, and these cowboys are just, flying around their private jets, picking up Mudricks and putting them on 8.5-year contracts, right? So, and whoever else, whichever player, long contracts have no economic value. It is some of the most stupid shit I've ever seen, and that's why nobody else is copying it.
But in fairness, you said this came into play this season?
Last year, right? So
obviously, when we started signing these players, we were in a position where we could hold on to them for 8 years, and they had no power. But that's changed.
Well, it's changed via hard rule, but I think you and I would know that if a player wants to leave anyway, they just leave, right? So now there's just a hard rule that a player can point to. So in fairness, and I see that you're being fair to them, at the time when they started, it doesn't make sense. Sorry, it would have kind of made sense for PSR rules, I guess. Then that loophole got closed. They continued doing it. Then the Diarra ruling happened, which didn't happen overnight, by the way. So somebody should have known this was possible. FIFA didn't create their rule overnight either. So I think there's just a blind spot from these guys. And now they're in a situation where all these players are really comfortable because they can leave after 3 years if they want.
Wow. And we're not really in a position to be dishing out bigger contracts anyway. That's the reality of it. Unless I suppose you are a key player that they could make money on, Palmer would be one of those players. But it would make no sense for Enzo or Caicedo to go, or even Cucurella, because they're not going to sell for more than you paid for them.
Caicedo, based on his fee, is a player that should be kept. I see Palmer as being a pretty attractive option for them to sell, given his price and wages. And then you can go down the list. I think Caicedo and Enzo will be difficult. they'll definitely make an economic loss on Enzo. He's not going for 100 million. So look, it's no matter how you slice this thing, you're just uncovering shit, right? And poor decision making, and it comes back to a governance problem, right? Which is that Eghbali and Boli did not have a strong board providing oversight and telling them, hey, when you're doing foolishness, right? They were jetting around on, picking up the mudricks and having fun blowing all these people's money. And right now, people are now starting to think, well, when are you going to pay the piper? And where's the money to pay the piper?
My God. Well, I have to say that's a revelation that I did not expect. I did not expect that at all. I had no idea about the DRA clause. No idea.
It's all up there. ChatGPT is a useful tool. And look, I encourage people. I use AI heavily. I use it for speed more so than for actual information, right? Because you have to be careful. It does give you the answers that you want, so you need to challenge it.
Yeah.
And always tell it, do not make stuff up. Just provide me with facts. And if you do that around the DRA ruling and Article 17, how it works, put into Google as well that Article 17 and ESAT, Newcastle, New Liverpool, and you should see that article come up. I believe it's from ESPN UK, and you can, that actually lays it out for you properly. That ESAT article from ESPN UK.
My goodness. I mean, to be honest with you, that we've gone through an awful lot, but I do want to see, before we finish off, Bobby, is there anything else that we need to do just to wrap this one up? Is there anything we've missed?
No, I think, look, we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm sure we've probably not covered enough questions from the audience, but hopefully we did provide them with quite a bit of an insight. That's the context before we actually dive into the numbers themselves. We touched on a few, but I think it'll be worthwhile understanding what financials fans should be reading and looking at to get the proper picture. So when we looking forward to getting together again to going through that.
Go on. We've got a couple of questions. Why not? They can't be this stupid, can they? How has it gone this wrong? I don't get it. Such big corporations and the amounts of money all being pissed away.
Look, I think you will see there was a comment from Jamie Dimon and another, I think the head of Bank of America, that private equity is going through its adolescent moment, where people are realizing that these guys have been doing a lot of shit unregulated for the last few years. So, they're looking back and saying, like, who's deciding to do this? It's not only a Chelsea situation. This is a broad industry problem where valuations are out of control. People are doing a lot of backdoor deals that are not in the interests of their investors, etc. So it's a corrupt space that needs to be cleaned up. So it doesn't surprise me now. I mean, we saw the foolishness for the last 4 years, and it was stupid, right? We were all sitting back and saying, this does not make sense. It just didn't look right. And it isn't right.
Oh, man, it's ridiculous. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that I've missed. Last question from JC. Why is Simon, ex-Crystal Palace owner Simon Jordan, such a fan of these owners? Surely he must know these owners are not smarter than him, who also nearly went bankrupt.
Look, I don't think anybody could take Jordan seriously. I would love to debate this man. Oh my goodness. It's performative stuff. He's doing a show. That's all it is. He's not a serious person.
So don't take him seriously. He says a lot of words. He says a lot of long words, but
sure, he's an entertainer. He's good at speaking, but there's no substance behind it. And shout out to Stevie Proper Chels, by the way.
Yes, I remember that debate.
All right. He's not a finance guy. Everybody isn't a finance guy, but his instinct was actually spot on. Right? He just knew there was something wrong. Something didn't smell right. And Jordan destroyed him, right? But it was unfair. And Stevie was right. So, debating with this Jordan guy, waste of time.
That was actually when I first had that's when I had my first call with you, because I was going on TalkSport, I think the day or two before the protest. And
you did a great job.
We don't want you to make a mess of yourself, Alex, so we'll give you some more information. And it was very helpful. So I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people will appreciate this video as well, Bobby. It's over 2 hours of information the whole way through, really. I mean, for those people who might have been joining a bit later on, we have gone through basically the whole journey, the whole process of the sale from Roman Abramovich, the conditions in place, how Bowley managed to raise the money with his side of the consortium, Mark Walter and Hansi Wiss, and then getting Clearlake involved in the fold as well. Then Clearlake raising money from multiple funds to get involved and actually have some cash to spend, because it wasn't just about buying the club, it was then having, was it 1.7 billion to invest, and then getting the banks involved, getting Ares involved, the PIK loans, and we found out about the Diarra clause as well. And not to mention, if everyone was going to make the money that they want to make or should be projected to make, Chelsea would be worth £9 billion, and that's without Bowley getting a single penny. So, I mean, so much to dissect. If you haven't listened to the whole thing, I really recommend you do. It's like a little podcast. Stick your earphones on, go for a little walk or whatever it is. There is so much to go through. This isn't the end of it, though, Bobby. We've got 2 more segments.
And hopefully a 4th with Ruben. So let's keep twisting his arm.
Oh, yes. Let's get Ruben involved.
But definitely looking forward to the second segment where we really dive into some numbers.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, Bobby. Thanks so much for joining me today. And big up to everyone that's been watching as well. Smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel as well. And we will be back very, very soon with part 2. And just so people know what we are going to be talking about, Bobby, what will part 2 be about?
I think it's important for folks to understand what numbers they should be looking at. So we coming off of that structure that you and I have on screen there, which is the right set of financial statements we should be reading, where can we find them? And then what are the numbers that we should be looking at in those financial statements to get a feel for what's really going on? And then the third segment is, well, looking forward based on that financial information, then where do we think they can go from here? So that's how I'm thinking we play it out.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Bobby. Big up to everyone. We will catch up very, very soon. All the best and have a great evening.
Thank you.